Hello and welcome. My name is Sara Harberson and I'm America's College Counselor. Thank you so much for joining me on this special edition of Facebook Live. It is all about early applications. So for those high school seniors or parents of high school seniors, you have tons of questions. This is your chance to ask those questions. If you have something before you submit your application, you want my feedback, you can ask it in the comment section below the live feed. If you've already submitted your application and you're wondering what happens next, ask those questions in the comment section below the live feed. This is your chance to get your questions answered. I'm going to try to get to as many of them as I can tonight. I'm excited to hear from you. If you are a high school senior or a parent of a high school senior or a parent of a younger student, I encourage you to send me a shout out. Let me know where you're coming from. If you are a high school student, let me know what year. If you're a parent, let me know what year your child is in high school. I'd love to hear from all of you because it gives me a sense of where everybody's coming from and what questions are going to be asked tonight. The reason that I like to do one of these special edition Facebook Live sessions every year at the end of October is because November 1st is one of the biggest admissions deadlines throughout the year. Out of all the times when students apply, this is a very popular time. If you follow me or you're a member of Application Nation, you know that I encourage students to apply early decision or early action or both, or even submit some applications to rolling admissions programs because you can submit those applications sometimes as early as the end of the summer, beginning of senior year, and the sooner you get your application in for those rolling admissions programs, the better chance you have of getting accepted. There are also advantages of applying early decision and early action, and we can talk about that tonight, but it looks like we already have some questions here, and I'm thrilled to see you all. All right, the first question that I'm going to be answering tonight is, what if the ACT and or transcripts don't get to the school by the deadline but were requested a month ahead of time? This happens a lot. So there are things that the student needs to do and there are things that the high school needs to do on behalf of the student. The student needs to follow those deadlines to a T. So if the deadline is November 1st, that means the student needs to submit their application by 11:59 p.m. Some colleges will say 11:59 p.m. within your time zone where you live or where that college or university is located. Now, most of the private colleges across the country, they're a little bit flexible with that deadline, especially when it comes to the materials coming from the high school. But there are going to be some large public universities like the University of Michigan, for example, that has very strict deadlines. Not only does the student need to submit their materials by the deadline, but the high school does as well, and the test scores need to be in as well. So if the student has already requested their recommendation letters, their transcripts, and there is still it still has not been received by the college or university, you want to try to follow up with the college counselor and see what's going on. The good news is it's very easy for the counselor to submit materials on behalf of the student. They usually are just pointing and clicking and the transcript gets sent, the recommendation letters get sent electronically. So it's very easy for the counselors to do this. However, a lot of college counselors across the country have an enormous caseload. Sometimes they're dealing with 300, 400, 500 seniors. And so they are usually taking every last hour and every last day leading up to the deadline to make sure that they're submitting materials. But ideally, all the information is going to be submitted by November 1st. But again, for some of those private colleges and universities, a lot of times the deadline is for the student and the materials from the high school can come in even a day or two, sometimes even a little bit later. The next question, do early action decisions ever get released early or are they rolled out? Or is it pretty much on the date given? So for early decision and early action, almost always, unless they have an unusual process, let's say like Wake Forest, they have a rolling early decision program, almost always the admissions office is going to pick a specific date and even a specific time when they are going to release admissions decisions for early action or early decision. Most of the time, Once the student submits their application and everything is in place, usually the college will notify all of their applicants, whether it's the early decision applicant pool or the early action applicant pool. Usually they will notify them a couple of days or maybe a week in advance to let them know what date and at what time they're going to be releasing those decisions. So almost always, all the decisions become available at a specific time, and almost always the colleges are going to let the applicants know that in advance. I mentioned Wake Forest having a rolling early decision program. That means that a student can technically apply early decision to Wake Forest as soon as their junior year of high school is done. We had a student in Application Nation class of 2020 who applied to Wake Forest early decision over the summer. He already got his decision back. He was admitted. So that can happen for a couple of colleges across the country. Next question. My question is about the audience for the engineering specific supplements. Are they read by the general admissions officer, or are they passed along to someone with an engineering background? My son is trying to just disappeared on me, but I think I've got the question. So it depends on the college, but almost all colleges are going to review applications through a central admissions office. However, when the admissions officer opens up that file online to read that application, they are considering the undergraduate school that the student is applying to, if it's a university, and even the major. So when they open up that application, they're putting that student in the context of the undergraduate program and the major that the student lists on their application. They're going to be looking for different things depending on what the student lists. So for an engineering student, they're going to be a little bit more focused on the math and science classes that the student has taken and the grades in those classes and any standardized tests that match up with math and science. They're also probably going to be looking at the activities to see if there's evidence to back up that academic interest in engineering. But in terms of the essays, it's usually read by the admissions office, the central admissions office. Sometimes at a larger university, they might split the admissions process up. So for example, Cornell has a number of undergraduate programs, and the undergraduate programs are heavily involved in the admissions process. So in that case, the person reading your application is going to be much more knowledgeable about the academic program that the student is applying to, but almost always, the regular admissions officer is going to be reading business applications, engineering applications, pre-med, English, liberal arts, nursing, everything that's offered at that college or university. Next question, is it a disadvantage to apply early decision if the student falls below a particular college SAT or GPA range? It's a great question. Early decision is always going to advantage the student, and that is because if a college offers early decision, they are going to usually fill a significant portion of their freshman class for early decision. Colleges do that for a reason. Early decision is a binding agreement. If they admit a student in early decision, that student is going to enroll unless there is a very unusual financial aid issue where the student would be released from the binding agreement. So because of this, in early decision, the acceptance rate is usually higher. Sometimes it's twice as high as it is in regular decision. Sometimes it's 3 times or even higher than that. So there are real advantages for a student applying early decision. If a student's SAT scores, ACT scores, or grades are a little bit below that middle 50% range, I can tell you that their best shot of getting into that college or university is going to be early decision. However, if it's a highly selective college, I tell students, if it's a highly selected college and they offer early decision, you need to be competitive within range to be competitive in that early decision applicant pool. So just applying early decision doesn't give you this automatic guarantee that you're going to get admitted. You need to be competitive, especially if you're applying to some of those highly selected colleges. That's usually going to be your best shot. Next question. Can you explain about guaranteed admission? Sometimes that term guaranteed admission is used when a student is applying to an undergraduate and law school combined program or an undergraduate and medical school combined program. Sometimes the materials for the college might say that if the student is admitted to that undergraduate and medical school program, their admission to medical school is guaranteed, but that's unusual because usually students still have to do well in college to get into medical school or be able to take that next step. Sometimes there are going to be colleges and universities that will give you an automatic admission if you show up at an open house and fill out the basic form or the basic application. So sometimes that terminology is used. If it says guaranteed admission, I'm always a little bit leery because colleges and universities really can't guarantee anything unless they see the full application. Next question. Hi, Sarah. I'm an Application Nation 2020 member. That's great. How do I know if my SAT scores have been received? The College Board website shows that my scores were sent to colleges on October 9th in the status column with a green check mark, but does not say that it's been received. So here's the issue. All of these students are being so good about getting their applications in, requesting their test scores well in advance so that there are no issues and no delays. If the College Board indicates that your test scores have been sent to the college, that's a good sign. It's done electronically. Unfortunately, though, the college usually is going to take time to process those test scores or those other pieces of your application. So they could be in possession of those test scores or your high school transcript, but maybe when you go online to check the status of your application on an admissions portal for that college, it might not be showing up that they've received your test scores or your transcript or your recommendation letters. I wouldn't worry too much right now. The College Board's website says that they've been sent. It's usually going to take several days, sometimes even several weeks on the part of the colleges to process all of the materials coming in. So they could have received it by the deadline, but sometimes it takes time for them to upload it into their admission system. So just stay patient. I think it's all going to work out. Next question, is there an advantage to naming a major or interest on an application like being pre-med, or does it hurt you if too many are applying for that program? So it's my belief, and my Application Nation families know this, that if you're applying to a highly selected college, I encourage you to list a specific major as long as you have academic strength in that area, you have passion for that academic area, and you have the evidence to back it up. However, there are going to be some programs and specific majors at every college or university that are going to be more competitive to get into. So pre-med applicant pools are usually incredibly strong. High test scores, high grades, lots of AP classes, especially in the sciences, and a lot of great evidence to back up that interest. Computer science, highly competitive. Lots of students applying right now to computer science programs and business programs. So if you are interested in one of these more popular programs or majors, you want to make sure that you have the application and the evidence to back it up. Next question, should students requiring financial aid avoid early decision, or should they apply knowing they can wiggle out of the commitment if the aid offer is insufficient? So you might get different advice depending on who you speak to, but most financial aid officers are going to be very conservative. They're going to tell families, listen, if you're concerned about your need-based financial aid package that we're going to give you, you probably shouldn't commit to early decision because technically it's a binding agreement. But if that's the case, then most students across the country wouldn't be able to apply early decision, even though they know that that's an advantage in the admissions process. So it's my belief that early decision shouldn't separate the haves and the have-nots. What I would recommend, though, is if your family needs financial aid for you to send your child to that college, I would encourage you to check out the net price calculator on that college's admissions or financial aid website. That is a federal requirement that all colleges have to offer that option, that GPA calculator, that net price calculator on their website. That will give you some sense of what your financial aid package will look like. I've heard mixed results from the net price calculator. Sometimes I hear it's very accurate. Sometimes I hear it's not accurate at all. There is another platform that's being used by some of the highly selected colleges called My Intuition, and that's supposed to be a more accurate calculator for families to use. But the fact is that if a student gets admitted under early decision, they get their financial aid package back, and they know that they cannot make that happen what the admissions office is then going to ask the family to do is they're going to have to fill out an appeal or another form to see if the financial aid office can come back with a better offer. If after the family and the financial aid office go back and forth, and if the family feels that they still cannot afford the package or afford to send their student to that college or their child to that college, they would be released from the binding agreement. But unfortunately, even though that's a good thing that the student would not be bound to go if they can't afford it, it does put them behind the 8 ball, because if they applied early decision at school, that might have limited them from applying to other programs in the early round. So just keep that in mind. But colleges will absolutely release a student from the binding agreement if the financial aid package doesn't work out. Next question. When to take the ACT or SAT in junior year to allow time to take the test twice and still meet the early action deadline? This is a great question. I recommend that high school juniors take an official SAT or ACT, I would say sometime in early winter, late fall, early winter for the first time. That's going to give them another opportunity to possibly take it a second time in the spring of junior year. If they want to take it a third time, they could take it during the summer. There are now SAT and ACT dates in the summertime or in the early fall. For most of the colleges and universities, even if they have an early decision or an early action program, almost always, they will accept fall testing from high school seniors. I would say University of Michigan and some of those larger universities, public universities, might have stricter deadlines, but for the most part, there are going to be a lot of high school seniors who are interested in early decision and early action and are taking the ACT in September or the SAT or subject tests in October, and they're still able to get those scores in on time. I should mention, though, that a lot of colleges and universities are now moving to self-reported scores. So the moment a student gets their scores in from the October SAT, they can immediately update the college. Next question, do colleges look at extracurriculars taking place during senior year planned for a long time? Well, yes. So when a student is filling out the application, the activity section is the most interesting, I would say, for most people. And they're going to be listing what year they did each activity. And ideally, they're continuing to do their activities through senior year. They're also, the admissions officer is going to be looking at things that the student is going to be doing later on in senior year. So let's say you play a spring sport. You played that sport 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade. How do you fill out that activities list? You can still list that spring sport and doing it for 12th grade as long as you plan to do it. The next question, if a student takes both the SAT and ACT and performs exceedingly better on one of them, should the student report both scores? It's interesting, Gail, I get this question a lot. So my feeling is if the college or university doesn't require the student to send all the SAT and all the ACT scores, you don't need to send them all that information. Send them what puts you in the best light. So if the student did better on one test over another, and the college does not require the student to send all their test scores for both tests, just send the college the best score. And if you're curious, there's a great conversion chart where you can compare your ACT score to your SAT score to figure out which one you scored better on, but usually the students know. But if you want to double check, I use the ACT-SAT conversion chart that is used by the College Board and the ACT organization. All right, next question. How can a student apply to some schools for one major and other schools for another using the Common App? Great question. So when a college uses the Common App, for example, or even the Coalition application, there are some general information in the Common App that's going to get sent to every college. But all those colleges are going to have their own individual supplement. And one of the required questions for that student to fill out on the college's supplement is what program or major they're interested in. And a lot of times students will change their major or program depending on the college or university. I'll just direct you to also not only filling out the supplement carefully in the major that you want, but also there's a section on Common App. I think it's called the Future Plans section. You want to make sure that if you're applying to different programs for different colleges, that your answer to the Future Plans question about what you think you want to do and what degree you think you'll get, you want to make sure that it's consistent with the majors and programs that you're listing on the specific supplements. It is possible for a student to submit an application to one college and then make changes to the Common App that will affect subsequent applications. However, it can get very tricky and very confusing, so you want to be as consistent and careful as possible. Next question, what is the weight of the SAT essay? There aren't many colleges at this point that are requiring the essay for the SAT or the writing section for the ACT. I know that the UC system, the University of California system, still requires the SAT with essay and the ACT with writing. However, even if a college wants to see that essay score, I can tell you that they're not putting nearly as much weight on that score for the essay or the writing section as they are for the other sections. And I am going to predict that that essay for the SAT and the writing section for the ACT is probably going to be eliminated in the near future, because at this point there aren't many colleges and universities that are requiring to see that. Next question, if you want to apply early action, the deadline being November 1st, but will take the SAT on November 2nd, how do you let the school know? Okay, great question. There are going to be plenty of colleges, mostly private colleges, that are going to permit the student to do this. So here is what you should do. When you're filling out the application, there's going to be a testing section. You can self-report test scores that you've previously gotten. You can also indicate whether or not you're going to be taking future tests as well. But as soon as your scores become available, you want to find out, and probably want to do this in advance, how you update the colleges. In some cases, you will need to go on the admissions portal. A lot of colleges right now will have an admissions portal where you can track to see if all of your materials are in. Sometimes you can even provide updates. So if your scores come in and you're able to update the portal, that's a very easy way to do that. In some cases, the college will say that if you have new scores from November and you're applying early decision or early action, sometimes they want those scores via email. So it really depends on the college, but I would call right now to find out what they recommend to send those later scores, and a lot of times they will accept it. If it's a November 2nd SAT scores, for example, a lot of times by the time the college gets those scores, the admissions officer has probably done at least an initial read on the application, but the admissions officer is required to see all updated information. So if anything comes in late, they've got to take a look at it as well. The next question, if a college doesn't require a recommendation, do you recommend going ahead and sending one? Can you use the same ones for honors colleges, merit scholarships? If so, I didn't see the rest of the question, but I think I have a pretty good sense of things. I would say read carefully what the college wants from the student. Go on the admissions website and look to see what they recommend. If they say, we do not permit any recommendation letters, that's pretty clear language, and I would not submit the letters of recommendation. But there are some colleges that say, we don't require any recommendation letters, but if you want to send them, you can. Or if you want to send extra, you can. I would read the fine print on the admissions website and find out. But some of those larger state universities, larger public universities, they're getting so many applications, and a lot of times they might limit the number of letters of recommendation, or they might not allow any recommendation letters at all. So make sure you follow what the college recommends. University of Michigan, they probably get the most early action applications of any institution in the country. They don't want to be flooded with a lot of extra materials, extra recommendation letters. Next question, does it matter if the colleges get the application on the last day that it is due? No, especially if it is a college with early action, early decision, or regular decision. The student just has to submit their application by the deadline. And so for those early decision and early action deadlines that are November 1st, keep in mind, admissions officers for those colleges are traveling up until that day. they don't start reading applications until after that deadline, and it takes sometimes several days for the admissions office to process all the information to pass along the applications for them to be read by the admissions officers. So it doesn't give you this added advantage necessarily if you're applying early decision or early action. You submit your application really, really early because you usually are relying on other people like your high school, college counselor to submit materials, but also you're not going to get this extra added advantage if you send in that application well before the deadline. If you're applying to a rolling admissions program, yes, the sooner you get it in, the better. That means that the admissions officers are going to be evaluating those applications as they come in. They're not going to wait until after the deadline. So it is absolutely okay to submit the application right on the deadline, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend sending your application in 24 to 48 hours before the deadline, just to be sure that it gets submitted on time with no issues at all. All right, next question. I think we have time for a few more. If the student took the SAT with writing, but the school does not require writing, will the school simply... I didn't see the rest of the question, but if the student takes the ACT with writing or the SAT with the essay section and the college does not require it, they might see the score, but it's not going to make a lot of difference to them at all. They might glance at it. If it's a low score, it's a low score. The fact is, they don't count it in the admissions process. So they will see it, but it's not going to make a difference in the end. It's what the student got on the required sections of the SAT and ACT and the combined or composite score that's going to matter to those colleges that don't require the essay or the writing score. Next question, how soon should letters of recommendation get to the admissions office? Same time as applications? Ideally, Pam, but that's not always the case. Usually, the school doesn't send in the transcript and the recommendation letters until the student submits their portion of the application. So when I was a college counselor at a high school, if the student submitted their application to Duke University at 11:59 p.m. on November 1st, and that was, let's say, in previous years, it could have been on a Sunday or a Saturday, for example, I was not going to get notification that the student submitted their application until that following Monday. That meant that I was sending those materials after the deadline. Now again, that's usually not an issue, but I would recommend that the student submit their portion of the application, make sure the notifications are in place to notify the college counselor that everything's in so that they can send their portion of the application, the transcript, the high school profile, and the recommendation letters. Maybe time for one more question? That's it, all right. Which is the last question that's gonna be? What is the difference between early admission and early decision? Okay, and I'll even say early action. So there's early admission, early decision, and early action. For most colleges and universities across the country, early admission usually refers to students who are younger than high school seniors applying to that college or university. So sometimes a high school junior is ready to apply to college. They don't want to finish up their senior year. Maybe they have almost all the requirements except English and gym, and they want to go to college early. So in some cases, colleges and universities will entertain applications from younger students, but it's rare for those students to get admitted because mostly for maturity and giving that student a chance to finish 4 years of high school. Early decision is when a college or university has a binding program, meaning that if the student gets admitted under early decision, they are expected to enroll unless there's a financial aid issue. So that means that that college needs to be that student's first choice. Early action, very similar deadlines. Students are notified about their decision around the same time as early decision programs, but it's not a binding program. So the student can get in early action to, let's say, Northeastern or University of Michigan, or the University of Virginia has an early action program, but they're not required or bound to go to that college or university. So they can get accepted early action to the University of Michigan. They can put that acceptance into their back pocket and continue to apply to other colleges in the regular decision round. And they have until May 1st to make a decision about where they plan to enroll. So a great question to end the night, making sure those definitions are clear in everyone's mind. I want to thank you all for joining me on this special edition of Facebook Live. I am encouraging all those high school seniors, you've got a little bit longer. This is the big push. I encourage you to try to get those early decision, early action applications in, because it can really give you some advantages. If not an early decision, with a clear advantage in terms of the acceptance rates. With early action, you can find out that you've been admitted to some colleges, sometimes as early as mid-December. So on that note, good luck to all those high school students, and look forward to seeing you back here again on our next Facebook Live. Take care and have a good night. Bye-bye.